1901 studio photograph resurfaces, and experts pale as they zoom into the girl's fingers. The estate sale occupied 3 floors of a narrow brick townhouse in Pittsburgh's Polish Hill neighborhood. Dr. Rebecca Hart moved carefully through rooms crowded with decades of accumulated possessions, furniture covered in dust sheets, boxes of kitchen implements, stacks of books with cracked spines. She had come looking for photographs, as she always did. Her exhibition on early 20th century working-class life needed authentic images, the kind that showed real people in their actual circumstances, not staged studio portraits of the wealthy. In the attic, she found a trunk filled with loose photographs, letters, and documents. Most were from the 1940s and 50s, weddings, christenings, family gatherings. But at the bottom, wrapped in yellowed tissue paper, was something older. The photograph was mounted on thick cardboard, its edges worn soft with age. 3 girls stood in front of a simple house with white clapboard siding. The oldest appeared to be about 12, the youngest perhaps 9. They wore plain dresses, clean but clearly homemade, with uneven hems and visible mending. Their shoes were scuffed and too large, probably hand-me-downs or purchased with room to grow. Their hair was pulled back severely, their faces serious. None of them smiled. Rebecca turned the photograph over. On the back, in faded pencil, someone had written, "Agnes, Rose, Helen, September 1901. She studied the image more closely. The house behind them was modest, almost austere, a worker's cottage probably. The yard was bare dirt, no grass or flowers. But what struck Rebecca most was the girls' posture. They stood rigid, formal, as if posing for a photograph was a solemn duty rather than a moment of celebration. Finding anything interesting? The estate coordinator, a tired-looking woman in her 60s, appeared in the attic doorway. "This one," Rebecca said, holding up the photograph. "Do you know anything about these girls?" The woman shook her head. "The house belonged to my husband's great-aunt. She died last month at 93. Most of this stuff has been packed away for years. We're just trying to clear it out." Rebecca negotiated a price for the photograph, $20, and carefully placed it in her archival portfolio. She had bought hundreds of old photographs over the years, most of them unremarkable except as historical documents. But something about this image stayed with her as she drove back to the Carnegie Museum of Art, where she worked as a curator of photographic collections. That evening, she placed the photograph on her lightbox to examine it more carefully. The detail was remarkable for its age. The photographer had known what he was doing. She could see individual threads in the girls' dresses, the grain of the wooden boards behind them, even the texture of their skin. Then she noticed their hands. Rebecca leaned closer to the lightbox, adjusting her magnifying glass. All 3 girls had positioned their hands formally, the oldest with hers clasped in front, the middle girl with hers at her sides, the youngest with one hand resting against her dress. Standard poses for the era. But there was something wrong with their fingers. Even under basic magnification, Rebecca could see irregular dark patches on their fingertips, not uniform dirt, but mottled staining concentrated around the nails and the pads of the fingers. The pattern was consistent across all 3 girls, though most pronounced on the 2 older sisters. She had examined thousands of 19th and early 20th century photographs. She knew what coal dust looked like on miners' faces, what flour looked like on bakers' hands, what ink stains looked like on printers' fingers. This was different. The next morning, Rebecca brought the photograph to the museum's conservation laboratory. Her colleague, Dr. James Patterson, specialized in photographic analysis and restoration. "I need high-resolution digital capture," she told him, "especially the hands." James set up the photograph under the museum's specialized scanner, a device capable of capturing details invisible to the naked eye. The process took nearly an hour, building a digital file with extraordinary resolution. When he transferred the image to his computer screen and zoomed in on the oldest girl's hands, he let out a low whistle. "What am I looking at?" Rebecca leaned over his shoulder. At this magnification, the staining on the girl's fingers was unmistakable. Dark, almost black patches concentrated at the fingertips, with lighter discoloration spreading toward the palms. The staining had seeped under the nails, creating dark crescents. On the middle girl's right hand, one fingertip appeared slightly swollen. "I don't know," Rebecca admitted. "That's why I need your help." Mayor James pulled up reference images of various industrial substances and their effects on skin. He compared the staining pattern to photographs of workers in different industries: coal miners, dye workers, tanners, printers. "The pattern is wrong for most industrial chemicals," he said. "Coal and soot create more uniform darkening. Dyes tend to stain more broadly, not just the fingertips. This is very localized, very specific. He zoomed in further. And look here. See how the skin texture appears slightly rough, almost pitted? That's not just staining, that's chemical damage. Rebecca felt her stomach tighten. Chemical damage? These are children. I know. James saved the enhanced images to a file. I think you need to talk to someone in industrial chemistry. This looks like prolonged exposure to something corrosive. That afternoon, Rebecca contacted Dr. Sarah Chen, a forensic chemist at the University of Pittsburgh who occasionally consulted on historical materials. She sent over the digital images with a brief explanation. Dr. Chen called back within 2 hours. "Where did you get this photograph?" Her voice was tense. "An estate sale. Why?" "Because those children were being poisoned." Rebecca's hand tightened on her phone. What? The staining pattern, the tissue damage, the concentration at the fingertips. It's consistent with phosphorus exposure, white phosphorus specifically. And in 1901, there was really only one industry that exposed children to white phosphorus on a regular basis. What industry? Match factories, Dr. Chen said quietly. Those girls were match workers. Rebecca spent the rest of the afternoon researching match factories and white phosphorus. What she found turned her stomach. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, matches were manufactured using white phosphorus, a highly toxic substance that ignited easily, making it ideal for strike-anywhere matches. The manufacturing process required workers, many of them children, to dip wooden splints into molten phosphorus mixture, pack the finished matches, and handle the materials for hours each day. White phosphorus was devastatingly toxic. Prolonged exposure caused a disease called phossy jaw, phosphorus necrosis of the bone. It began with toothaches and swollen gums, then progressed to abscesses in the jaw. The bone would literally rot, creating holes in the face that oozed pus and emitted a greenish glow in the dark. The only treatment was surgical removal of the affected bone, often leaving victims horrifically disfigured. Many died from infection or organ failure. Before phossy jaw developed, the first sign of phosphorus exposure was exactly what Rebecca saw in the photograph. Dark staining on the fingers and hands, where workers had constant contact with the substance. Match factories had employed thousands of children, particularly girls, because their small fingers were considered ideal for the delicate work. They worked 10 to 12-hour days in poorly ventilated rooms, thick with phosphorus fumes. The pay was minimal, sometimes just pennies per day. Reform movements had fought against white phosphorus for decades. The disease was well documented, the suffering undeniable. But the match industry was profitable, and manufacturers resisted change. It wasn't until 1912 that the United States finally imposed a prohibitive tax on white phosphorus matches, effectively banning their production. But in 1901, when this photograph was taken, the match factories were still running at full capacity. Rebecca looked again at the three girls in the photograph, Agnes, Rose, and Helen. They couldn't have been older than 9, 10, and 12. They stood in front of their modest home, wearing their cleanest dresses, trying to look dignified for the camera. And their fingers showed that they were slowly being poisoned. She needed to find out who these girls were, what had happened to them, whether they had survived. The photograph had been found in Polish Hill, a neighborhood historically populated by Polish immigrants. That was a starting point. Rebecca drove to the Carnegie Library's Pennsylvania room, which housed the city's historical archives. She requested census records for Pittsburgh's Polish Hill neighborhood from 1900 and 1910. The 1900 census was handwritten, difficult to read, but she worked through it systematically, looking for families with 3 daughters in the right age range. Polish surnames dominated the pages: Kowalski, Nowak, Wojcik, Tomczyk. Then she found an entry that made her pause. Kaminsky household. Mother, Anna, age 32, widow. Daughters, Agnes, age 11, Rose, age 9, Helen, age 8, Sophie, age 4. 4 daughters, but only 3 appeared in the photograph. The youngest, Sophie, would have been about 5 in 1901, perhaps too young to work, which might explain her absence from the image. Rebecca cross-referenced the address, 427 Dobson Street, Polish Hill. She pulled up a historical map of Pittsburgh. Dobson Street had existed in 1900, running through the heart of the immigrant neighborhood, just blocks from several large industrial facilities. She searched for more information about the Kaminsky family. The 1910 census showed the same household, but with changes. Anna Kaminsky was listed as 42, still a widow. Agnes was now 21. Occupation: Seamstress. Rose was 19. Occupation: factory worker. Helen was 18. Occupation: student. Sophie was 14. Occupation: none. Rebecca sat back, processing what she'd found. Agnes had survived to adulthood, but she'd left factory work. Rose was still working in a factory, possibly the match factory. Helen was unusually still in school at 18, and the mother, Anna, had kept her household together for at least a decade after her husband's death. But the census didn't tell Rebecca what she really needed to know. Had the girls developed phossy jaw? Had they escaped the match factory? What had their lives been like? She needed medical records, hospital admissions, anything that might document their health. The next morning, Rebecca visited Allegheny General Hospital's medical archives. The hospital had served Pittsburgh's immigrant communities since the 1880s, and many of its historical records had been preserved. The archivist, a man named Robert Finch, listened to her request with interest. Medical records from that era are tricky, he warned. Privacy laws are more relaxed for records over a century old, but the records themselves are often incomplete or illegible. What exactly are you looking for? Cases of phosphorus necrosis, particularly in children. Specifically, I'm looking for 3 girls from a Polish immigrant family: Agnes, Rose, and Helen Kaminsky. Robert's expression grew somber. Phossy jaw cases. We have some records, though I have to warn you, they're not pleasant reading. He returned 20 minutes later with a large ledger and several manila folders. This is our admissions log from 1900 to 1910, and these are case files for patients treated for phosphorus-related illnesses. Rebecca opened the ledger carefully. The entries were handwritten in careful script: names, dates, ages, diagnoses, outcomes. She found the case and began scanning down the page. And there it was. Kaminsky Agnes, age 14, admitted March 17, 1903. Diagnosis: phosphorus necrosis of mandible, surgical intervention required. Rebecca's hands trembled as she opened the corresponding case file. Inside were treatment notes written by a Dr. William Morrison, a surgeon who had specialized in treating industrial disease victims. The notes were clinical but devastating. Patient presented with advanced necrosis of right mandible, extending from first molar to angle of jaw. Suppuration extensive, with visible bone exposure. Patient reports onset of symptoms approximately 8 months prior. Initial toothache, progressive swelling, development of abscess. Employment history: Diamond Match Company, 1899-1903. Surgical intervention performed March 19, 1903. Removed necrotic bone segment measuring approximately 4 centimeters. Extensive debridement required. Patient tolerated procedure. Prognosis guarded. Follow-up April 2, 1903. Wound healing adequately. Patient discharged to home care. Facial disfigurement permanent. Advised to seek alternative employment. Rebecca closed the file, feeling sick. Agnes had been 14 years old, just a child, when part of her jaw was cut away. She tried to imagine the pain, the fear, the permanent disfigurement that would have marked her for life. She searched the ledger for Rose and Helen. Rose's name didn't appear. Perhaps she had escaped the disease, or had been treated elsewhere, or had never developed it. Helen's name also didn't appear. But there was another entry that caught Rebecca's attention. Kaminsky, Anna, age 35, admitted June 3, 1902. Diagnosis: exhaustion, malnutrition. Discharged June 8, 1902. The mother had been hospitalized for exhaustion. Rebecca could imagine the crushing weight Anna must have carried, a widow with 4 daughters, forcing her children into dangerous work just to survive, watching them come home with darkened fingers, and eventually, perhaps, with aching jaws. Robert had been watching her face. "Did you find what you were looking for?" "Yes," Rebecca said quietly. "More than I wanted to." She photographed the relevant pages with her phone, thanked Robert, and left the hospital feeling heavy with the weight of what she'd learned. Back in her office, Rebecca began searching for any additional information about the Kaminsky family. She accessed newspaper archives, looking for mentions of the Diamond Match Company, labor disputes, accidents, anything that might provide context. She found dozens of articles about match workers, strikes, health investigations, reform campaigns. One article from the Pittsburgh Press in 1902 caught her attention. Investigation reveals shocking conditions at match factory. A special committee investigating working conditions at the Diamond Match Company has found evidence of widespread illness among child workers. More than 40 cases of phosphorus-related disease have been documented over the past 5 years, with several resulting in death. The company denies responsibility, claiming that workers failed to follow proper safety procedures. The article went on to quote a labor reformer named Margaret Flynn, who had been campaigning against child labor in match factories. These children are being sacrificed for profit. They work in rooms thick with poisonous fumes, handling toxic materials for pennies a day. When they become sick, they are dismissed and replaced. This is not employment, it is slow murder. Rebecca sat back, thinking about the photograph again. It had been taken in September 1901. By March 1903, less than 2 years later, Agnes was in surgery, having part of her jaw removed. Rebecca decided to search for the photographer who had taken the image. The back of the photograph had only shown the girls' names and the date, but the mounting style and the quality of the image suggested a professional photographer, not a simple snapshot. She examined the photograph's cardboard backing under magnification, looking for any embossed marks or stamps that photographers typically used. In the lower right corner, barely visible, she found it. T. Brennan, photographer, Pittsburgh. Rebecca searched city directories from 1901. Thomas Brennan appeared in the 1900 and 1902 directories, listed as photographer with an address on Liberty Avenue. But by 1905, his listing had disappeared. She visited the Historical Society of Western Pennsylvania, which maintained collections of local business records. A helpful researcher named Ellen brought her a box labeled Brennan Photography Studio, 1898-1904. Inside were business ledgers, correspondence, and advertisement proofs. Thomas Brennan had operated a modest photography business serving working-class families. His advertisements emphasized affordability. Quality family portraits, $1.50 wow. Home visits available. $1.50 was still expensive for a family like the Kaminskys, probably equivalent to several days' wages. But the home visit option explained why the photograph showed the girls in front of their house rather than in a studio. Rebecca found Brennan's appointment ledger for September 1901. On September 14th, there was an entry. Kaminsky, 427 Dobson St. 2 p.m., family portrait, $1.50 paid. So Anna Kaminsky had hired Brennan to take a photograph of her daughters. Why? What had motivated a struggling widow to spend precious money on a photograph? Rebecca thought about immigrant families, about the letters they sent back to relatives in Poland, about the desire to show that they were surviving, even thriving, in America. Perhaps Anna had wanted to send a photograph home to prove that her daughters were well. Or perhaps Rebecca felt a chill. Perhaps Anna already knew something was wrong. Perhaps she wanted a photograph while her daughters were still healthy, before the phosphorus took its toll. Among Brennan's papers, Rebecca found a small notebook labeled Notes and Observations. It appeared to be a personal journal where Brennan recorded thoughts about his work. An entry from September 14, 1901 read, "Photographed the Kaminsky girls today. 3 sisters, very serious and dignified despite their young years. The mother wanted them photographed in their Sunday dresses in front of the house. She was very particular about their appearance, made sure their hair was neat, their dresses pressed. I noticed the girls' hands were stained, dark marks on their fingers. When I asked, the mother said they worked at the match factory. I photographed other match workers. I know what those stains mean. I said nothing, but I made sure to position the camera so their hands would be visible. Someone should see this. Someone should know what's being done to these children." Rebecca read the passage 3 times. Brennan had known. He had deliberately documented the evidence of phosphorus exposure, making sure the girls' hands were clearly visible in the photograph. He wasn't a reformer like Margaret Flynn, wasn't a crusader. He was just a working photographer trying to make a living. But he had seen injustice, and in his own quiet way, he had created a record of it. Rebecca wondered what had happened to Brennan. She searched death records and found that Thomas Brennan had died in 1904 at age 38 of tuberculosis, another common killer in industrial Pittsburgh. But his photograph had survived, and now, more than 120 years later, it was finally being seen. Rebecca decided to try finding living descendants of the Kaminsky family. If any of the sisters had married and had children, their family lines might still exist in Pittsburgh. She started with genealogical databases, searching for Agnes, Rose, and Helen Kaminsky. Agnes had married in 1910. She found the marriage certificate at the county courthouse. Agnes Kaminsky to Joseph Kowalczyk, June 12, 1910. Agnes had taken her husband's name. Rebecca searched for Agnes Kowalczyk in later records. She found a death certificate from 1967. Agnes Kowalczyk, age 78, died of heart failure. The certificate listed 3 surviving children, Rebecca traced those children forward. 2 had died, but one, a daughter named Marie, had a granddaughter living in Pittsburgh, Catherine Novak, age 42. Rebecca found a phone number and called, her heart pounding. A woman answered on the 3rd ring. "Hello? Is this Catherine Novak?" "Yes. Who's calling?" "My name is Dr. Rebecca Hart. I'm a curator at the Carnegie Museum. I'm researching a historical photograph, and I believe it shows your great-great-grandmother Agnes and her sisters. Would you be willing to talk with me?" There was a long pause. "A photograph of my great-great-grandmother? I didn't know any existed. It's from 1901, before she married. It shows 3 young girls in front of a house. Can I see it?" They arranged to meet the following Saturday at a coffee shop in Lawrenceville. When Rebecca arrived, Catherine was already there, a woman with dark hair and serious eyes that reminded Rebecca immediately of the girls in the photograph. Rebecca brought her laptop and pulled up the high-resolution digital image. Catherine leaned forward, studying it intently. "That's her," she said softly. "I've seen one photograph of my great-great-grandmother from when she was much older, but I can see her in this girl's face, the oldest one." "Her name was Agnes," Rebecca said. "The middle one is Rose, and the youngest is Helen. They were your great-great-grandmother's sisters." Catherine zoomed in on the image, then gasped when she saw the magnified view of their hands. "What is that on their fingers?" "Phosphorus staining. They worked in a match factory." Rebecca explained what she had learned, the toxic conditions, the disease, the surgery Agnes had undergone. Catherine sat back, her face pale. "My grandmother, Agnes's daughter, used to tell me that Agnes had a scar on her face, on her jaw. She said it was from a surgery when Agnes was young, but she never knew what kind of surgery. Agnes never talked about it. It was from phosphorus necrosis," Rebecca said gently. "Part of her jawbone had to be removed." Catherine's eyes filled with tears. She was just a child. How could they do that to children? "Because children were cheap labor," Rebecca said, "and because the law didn't protect them." Catherine wiped her eyes. "What happened to the other sisters? Rose and Helen?" "I'm still researching that," Rebecca admitted. "I know Rose was still listed as a factory worker in 1910, but I haven't found marriage or death records for her yet. Helen was unusual. She was still in school at age 18 in 1910, which was rare for working-class girls." "Do you have any other family records?" Rebecca asked. "Letters, documents, anything that might tell us more about their lives?" Catherine thought for a moment. "My grandmother left some boxes of old papers when she died. I never went through them carefully. They're in my attic. Would you like me to look?" "Very much." They exchanged contact information, and Catherine promised to search through her grandmother's belongings. 3 days later, Catherine called Rebecca. Her voice was excited. "I found something. Can you come over?" Rebecca drove to Catherine's house in Bloomfield that evening. Catherine led her to the dining room table, where several cardboard boxes sat open. "Most of it is just ordinary stuff. Recipes, church bulletins, old bills. But I found this." She held up a small leather-bound book, its cover worn and cracked. "It's a diary. It belonged to Rose." Rebecca's hands trembled as she took the diary. The first entry was dated January 1st, 1905. "I am starting this diary as Miss Flynn suggested. She says writing helps us remember who we are, even when the work tries to make us forget." Miss Flynn. Margaret Flynn, the labor reformer Rebecca had read about in the newspaper articles. She turned the pages carefully. Rose's handwriting was careful but unpracticed, suggesting limited education. The entries were short, often just a few sentences about daily life, work, church, family. But some entries cut to the heart. March 12, 1905. Agnes's face still pains her. She tries to hide it, but I see her touching the scar when she thinks no one is watching. She cannot smile properly anymore. Mother cries at night when she thinks we are asleep. April 3rd, 1905. Mr. Kowalczyk from the bakery spoke to Agnes today. He was kind to her even though her face is scarred. Mother hopes he will court her. Agnes deserves happiness after what the factory took from her. June 17th, 1905. Miss Flynn came to our house today. She wants to include our story in her report to the state legislature. She wants to help pass laws to protect children. Mother gave permission. Agnes showed Miss Flynn her scar. Miss Flynn cried. Rebecca looked up at Catherine. "Did your family know about Margaret Flynn?" "No, this is the first I've heard that name." Rebecca returned to the diary. The entries from 1905 and 1906 documented Rose's continued work at the Diamond Match Company, despite knowing the dangers. "We need the money," she wrote simply. "Mother cannot work enough for all of us. Sophie is still young. Helen must stay in school. Someone in this family must have education." Then, an entry from November 1906. "The state passed a law. Children under 14 cannot work in match factories anymore. I am 17, so it does not help me. But Helen can stay in school, and Sophie will never have to work there. That is something." The 1906 Pennsylvania child labor law had raised the minimum age for factory work and specifically banned children under 14 from match factories and other dangerous industries. Margaret Flynn and other reformers had fought for years to pass it. Rose's diary suggested that Agnes's story had been part of that campaign. Rebecca continued reading. In 1908, Rose wrote, "I am leaving the factory. Miss Flynn helped me find work at a garment shop. The pay is less, but my fingers will heal. I can feel them again properly for the first time in years." The entries from 1908 through 1910 documented Rose's new life as a garment worker. The work was still hard, long hours, low pay, poor conditions, but it wasn't poisoning her. In 1911, Rose wrote, "I have joined the Ladies' Garment Workers Union. Miss Flynn says women must stand together to demand better conditions. I think of Agnes, of what the factory did to her, and I know she is right. We must fight." Catherine was reading over Rebecca's shoulder. She became a labor activist. "It looks that way," Rebecca said. She paged forward, but the entries became less frequent after 1911. The last entry was dated June 1914. "I am marrying Thomas Kowalski next month. He is a good man who does not care that my hands are still stained. He says they are proof that I have worked hard, that I am strong. I think I am ready to be happy now." Rebecca closed the diary gently. Rose survived. She escaped the factory. She found love. She fought for other workers. Catherine had more to show Rebecca. From another box, she pulled out a bundle of letters tied with string. These are letters between the sisters. From the 1920s and 30s, Agnes, Rose, and Helen wrote to each other regularly, even though they all lived in Pittsburgh. I think they needed to stay connected after everything they'd been through. Rebecca untied the string carefully and began reading. The letters were mundane on the surface, discussions of children, household matters, church events, but they revealed the deep bond between the sisters. A letter from Helen to Agnes, dated 1923, was particularly revealing. "Dearest Agnes, I have been thinking about Mother lately. It has been 3 years since she passed, and I still miss her terribly. I was going through some of her things and found the photograph, the one Mr. Brennan took of the 3 of us in front of the house in 1901. Do you remember that day? Mother insisted we wear our Sunday dresses even though it was the middle of the week. She combed our hair until it shone. She wanted us to look our best. I realize now that she knew. She knew what the factory was doing to us. She knew about the phosphorus, about the disease. She took that photograph while we were still whole, before the factory took pieces of you that can never be returned. I teach my students about the labor laws now, about the reforms that protect children. I tell them that those laws were written in the suffering of girls like us. Sometimes I show them the photograph, though I do not tell them it is us. I say, these are the children who paid the price for the protections you now enjoy. You were so brave, Agnes. You survived what should have killed you. You built a life, raised children, found joy despite everything. I am so proud to be your sister. With all my love, Helen." Rebecca set the letter down, her throat tight. Helen became a teacher. "Yes," Catherine said. "She taught at a public school in the Hill District for 30 years. My grandmother said Helen was passionate about education, about making sure children had opportunities she and her sisters never had." Rebecca found another letter, this one from Agnes to Rose, dated 1931. "Dear Rose, I saw in the newspaper that you spoke at the rally for better factory conditions. Mother would have been proud of you. So am I. You have turned your pain into purpose. I cannot speak publicly as you do. My scarred face draws attention I do not want. But I can contribute in my own way. I have been sewing garments at home. The union pays fair wages for piecework. It is not much, but it is honest work that does not poison anyone. Joseph and I are teaching our children about fairness, about standing up for those who have no voice. Our daughter Marie asks why my face looks the way it does. I told her the truth. I told her about the factory, about the phosphorus, about the surgery. She cried and said it was not fair. I told her she is right. It was not fair, and that is why she must fight for fairness in her own life. The photograph Mr. Brennan took sits on my dresser. Sometimes I look at it and remember who we were before the factory marked us. But mostly, I look at it and remember that we survived. We three sisters, we survived, and we have made lives worth living. Your loving sister, Agnes. Catherine wiped tears from her eyes. They were extraordinary women. They were, Rebecca agreed. Ordinary girls who were forced into extraordinary circumstances and who found the strength to survive and fight back. She looked through the remaining letters, finding references to family gatherings, to the sisters supporting each other through hardships, to their shared memories of their mother and their difficult childhoods. One letter from Rose, dated 1938, mentioned the photograph specifically. I am sending you a copy of the photograph Mr. Brennan took. A union organizer helped me have it reproduced. I have given copies to several labor museums and archives. Our story should be remembered. Other girls should know that we existed, that we suffered, that we fought. Rebecca's heart quickened. Rose had copies made? Catherine nodded. That's how we have this one. She pulled out a framed photograph from the bottom of the box. It was a reproduction of the original, slightly grainier, clearly a copy rather than the original print, but showing the same three girls in front of the same house. Do you know where Rose sent the other copies? Rebecca asked. No, but she mentioned labor museums. There might be records. Over the next 2 weeks, Rebecca contacted labor history archives across the country. She found that Rose had indeed sent copies of the photograph to at least 5 institutions between 1938 and 1942, always with a letter explaining what it showed and why it mattered. The Kiel Center at Cornell University had 1 copy, with Rose's accompanying letter. This photograph shows my sisters and me in 1901, when we worked at the Diamond Match Company in Pittsburgh. We were between 9 and 12 years old. The dark stains on our fingers are from white phosphorus. My oldest sister Agnes developed phosphorus necrosis and required surgery that left her permanently disfigured. We are sharing this photograph so that people will remember what was done to children before the labor laws protected them. We are sharing it so that those protections are never taken away. The Wisconsin Historical Society had another copy. The Tamament Library at NYU had a third. Each came with similar letters from Rose, documenting her experience and urging that the photograph be preserved as historical evidence. Rebecca also found references to Rose in labor union records. She had been an active organizer for the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, speaking at rallies, participating in strikes, mentoring young women workers. In 1936, she had testified before a congressional committee investigating industrial working conditions, describing her experiences in the match factory and showing her stained fingers as evidence, even though by then they had faded to light brown. Rose had died in 1959, at age 67. Her obituary in the Pittsburgh Press identified her as a longtime labor activist and advocate for workers' rights. Helen had died in 1952, at age 60. Her obituary noted that she had taught elementary school for 3 decades and had been beloved by generations of students for her dedication and compassion. Agnes had lived the longest, dying in 1967 at age 78. Her obituary was brief, mentioning only that she was a devoted mother and grandmother who was survived by 3 children and 7 grandchildren. But Rebecca knew the fuller story now. She knew about their childhood, their suffering, their resilience, their different paths toward healing and meaning. She began planning an exhibition for the Carnegie Museum. It would be called Witnesses, Child Labor in Industrial America, and it would center on the Kaminsky sisters' photograph. She worked with Catherine to gather materials: Rose's diary, the letters between the sisters, the medical records documenting Agnes's surgery, newspaper articles about the match factory, Margaret Flynn's reform campaign documents, and photographs of the Diamond Match Company and other industrial sites where children had worked. But the heart of the exhibition would be the photograph itself, displayed in high resolution with magnification showing the phosphorus stains on the girls' fingers. Rebecca wanted viewers to see what Thomas Brennan had deliberately documented: the visible evidence of industrial poisoning marked on the hands of children. Dr. Sarah Chen, the forensic chemist, agreed to provide an educational panel explaining white phosphorus, its effects on the human body, and the disease it caused. She included historical photographs of Fosse jaw victims, carefully contextualized and respectfully presented, so that viewers would understand the full horror of what these girls had faced. Rebecca also included a timeline of labor reform, showing how activists like Margaret Flynn had fought for protections, how photographs and personal testimonies had swayed public opinion, and how laws had gradually been passed to protect children from the most dangerous forms of industrial work. The exhibition was scheduled to open in September 2024, 123 years after the photograph had been taken. On opening night, the museum's gallery was filled with people: historians, labor activists, teachers, descendants of immigrant families, and members of Catherine's extended family. Catherine had brought her mother, her children, and several cousins, all descendants of the Kaminsky sisters. Rebecca stood before the large-scale print of the photograph, addressing the assembled crowd. In September 1901, a photographer named Thomas Brennan visited a modest house in Pittsburgh's Polish Hill neighborhood. He was hired by a widow named Anna Kaminsky to photograph her three oldest daughters, Agnes, Rose, and Helen. The cost was $1.50, a significant expense for a struggling family. Anna dressed her daughters in their Sunday clothes, combed their hair until it shone, and positioned them in front of their home. She wanted them to look their best. Perhaps she was sending the photograph to relatives in Poland. Perhaps she simply wanted a record of her daughters while they were still young. But Thomas Brennan saw something Anna might have tried to hide. He saw the dark stains on the girls' fingers, evidence that they worked at a match factory, handling white phosphorus, one of the most toxic substances used in American industry. He positioned his camera deliberately to make sure those hands were visible. He created a record. Within 2 years, Agnes would undergo surgery to remove part of her jawbone, destroyed by phosphorus necrosis. She was 14 years old. She survived, but she bore the scars for the rest of her life. Rose continued working at the match factory until 1908, when labor reformers helped her find safer work. She became a union organizer, fighting for the protections that came too late for her and her sisters. She spent decades ensuring that other children would not suffer as she had. Helen escaped the factory early, thanks to the 1906 Pennsylvania child labor law, a law passed partly because of testimony about cases like Agnes's. She became a teacher, dedicating her life to education and opportunity. These three girls, marked by industrial poisoning, scarred by a system that valued profit over their lives, survived. They built families, found purpose, created change. They refused to let what had been done to them define their entire existence. And they made sure their story was preserved. Rose sent copies of this photograph to labor archives across the country. She testified before Congress. She told her story repeatedly, not because she wanted sympathy, but because she wanted the truth to be remembered. This exhibition honors their witness. It honors all the children who worked in dangerous conditions before laws protected them. And it reminds us that those protections, the ones we now take for granted, were won through the suffering and courage of people like Agnes, Rose, and Helen Kaminsky. The crowd applauded. Catherine stepped forward, standing beside the photograph of her great-great-grandmother and her sisters. "When Dr. Hart first contacted me," Catherine said, "I had no idea this photograph existed. My family knew the stories. We knew about Agnes's surgery, about Rose's activism, about Helen's teaching career, but we had never seen them as children, before everything happened. Looking at this image now, knowing what I know about phosphorus and the disease it caused, I see their bravery differently. These were just little girls. They should have been playing, going to school, being children. Instead, they were handling poison for pennies a day so their family could survive. But I also see their dignity. Look at how they stand, straight-backed, serious, meeting the camera's eye. They knew this photograph mattered. They knew they mattered. And they were right. My great-great-grandmother Agnes lived to be 78 years old. She raised 3 children who raised their own children. I exist because she survived what should have killed her. That feels important to remember." Rebecca watched as visitors moved through the exhibition, stopping before each panel, reading Rose's diary entries, examining the medical records, studying the photograph. Many took photographs with their phones, the image of the 3 girls spreading outward into the world again, their witness renewed for a new century. A teacher from a local high school approached Rebecca. "I'd like to bring my students here. We're studying the progressive era and labor reform. This makes it real in a way textbooks can't." "Please do," Rebecca said. "That's exactly why we created this exhibition." Later that evening, after the crowd had thinned, Rebecca stood alone before the photograph one more time. She thought about Thomas Brennan, who had seen these girls and made sure to document what was being done to them. She thought about Anna Kaminsky, who had scraped together money for this photograph even as her daughters were being poisoned. She thought about Margaret Flynn and other reformers who had fought for change. She thought about Rose, spending decades telling her story so that others would be protected. And she thought about the photograph itself, a simple image of three girls in front of a house, taken on a September afternoon in 1901. For more than a century, it had survived in attics and archives, carrying its quiet testimony forward through time. The dark stains on their fingers had seemed like nothing at first, just smudges, easily overlooked. But those stains were evidence. They were truth. They were witness to what had been done, and to what those girls had survived. Rebecca looked at Agnes, Rose, and Helen, three sisters marked by industry, bound by family, made strong by suffering. They gazed back at her across 123 years, their eyes serious, their posture dignified, their stained fingers visible for anyone willing to look closely enough to see. The photograph had done its work. It had waited patiently for someone to notice, to investigate, to understand. And now their story, hidden so long in plain sight, would be remembered, honored, and preserved. Three girls, one photograph, a truth that refused to stay buried.